Derrick Carter had never been one to follow the crowd. From a young age, he had learned to carve his own path. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Detroit, his early years were colored by adversity. People around him expected failure, based solely on his race. They looked at him and saw a statistic, a young black man destined to follow the same pattern as so many others before him. But Derrick was different. He fought against those expectations, excelling in school, sports, and eventually carving out a successful career in architecture. At 28, Derrick was everything he'd ever dreamed of becoming. He was respected in his field, making his mark as one of the youngest lead architects in the city. Yet none of that mattered when it came to Lily. Lily Thompson had entered his life like a quiet breeze on a scorching summer day, refreshing, gentle, and undeniably magnetic. They had met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. The moment Derrick laid eyes on her, he knew she was different. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. While many people might have focused on his skin color or his background, Lily saw him for who he truly was, intelligent, kind, and determined. They started talking, and it was as if the world around them faded into the background. They had spent the entire evening in deep conversation, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. Their relationship hadn't been without its challenges. They faced stares, comments, and a steady undercurrent of disapproval from people around them. But they had learned to tune out the noise. In Lily, Derrick found not just a partner, but someone who believed in him in a way no one else ever had. She didn't see the barriers that society tried to erect between them. To her, Derrick was just Derrick, someone worthy of love, respect, and partnership. Despite their love, Derrick couldn't shake the feeling that there was a storm on the horizon. Lily's parents had always been polite to him, but he could tell there was an underlying tension whenever he was around. They never said anything overtly cruel or disrespectful, but their discomfort was palpable. Derrick didn't want to admit it, but deep down he feared that Lily's parents wouldn't accept their relationship. Derrick's thoughts often wandered to the idea of proposing, but the doubt lingered. What if her parents didn't approve? What if their disapproval caused a rift between him and Lily? He had seen so many families torn apart over issues of race, culture, and status. But every time he thought about the future, he always came back to one simple truth. He loved Lily. And if that meant facing challenges, then he was ready. The day Derrick decided to propose, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. The decision had been building in his heart for months. They were out at the park, a special place for them. It was where they had first met, where their bond had begun. The setting was serene, with tall oak trees lining the edge of the park, their branches swaying gently in the spring breeze. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the world. It was perfect. Lily stood beside him, her laugh echoing in the air as she shared a funny story about her childhood. Derrick couldn't help but smile at how effortlessly she brightened every moment. As they strolled through the park, he slowed down and looked around, gathering his thoughts. This was it. This was the moment he had been preparing for. They stopped near a small pond, its waters reflecting the blue of the sky and the greenery around them. Derrick's heart was pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the decision in the air, but he also knew it was the right time. Lily turned to face him, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What's wrong, Derrick? You look a little nervous." Derrick chuckled, trying to calm his nerves. "I guess I just have something important to ask you." Lily smiled warmly, her eyes full of love. "What is it?" He took a deep breath and dropped to one knee. The world around them seemed to still, the sounds of the park fading into the background. Derrick pulled out the small velvet box from his pocket, holding it in front of her. "Lily, these past 4 years have been the best of my life," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've never met anyone like you, someone who sees me for who I am, not just the color of my skin or what society expects. You've made me believe in love, in us, and in a future I never thought was possible. So I want to ask you—" Lily's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in surprise. "Derrick, will you marry me?" Time seemed to freeze as Lily stared at him, the reality of the moment settling over her like a soft blanket. Her eyes filled with tears as she gasped, a hand covering her mouth as if she couldn't quite believe it. Derrick's heart was in his throat as he awaited her response, his entire future hanging in the balance. "Yes," Lily finally exclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes!" Derrick stood up, his heart racing as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The moment they embraced, the world came alive again. Her warmth surrounded him, and all the doubts that had plagued him vanished in an instant. This was it. This was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Derrick couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He had no doubt that Lily was his soulmate, but something inside him warned that their love was about to face its biggest test yet. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that Lily's parents would not take the news well. They had always been polite to him, but he had seen the way they looked at him, like they were tolerating him, not truly accepting him. Derrick didn't want to lose Lily over her family's prejudice, but at that moment, he promised himself that no matter what happened, he would fight for their love. They didn't need anyone else's approval to be happy, but he still feared what her parents would say. The storm was coming, and Derrick had no idea how it would change everything, too. The days following the proposal were a blur of excitement and anticipation for Derrick. He and Lily spent their time celebrating their engagement, dreaming of their future together. But no matter how happy they were, there was always that nagging thought in the back of Derrick's mind. Lily's parents had been distant since the early days of their relationship. Polite, but distant. They had never openly objected, but there were the subtle, sometimes overt signs, small comments, uncomfortable silences. Derrick had never felt completely accepted by them, and though Lily was always quick to defend him, he knew that their approval, especially her father's, would be a significant hurdle. It wasn't until Lily told him she wanted to break the news about the engagement to her parents that Derrick's unease turned into dread. Lily had arranged dinner at her parents' house, a place where they had spent countless hours in the past, but always as guests, never as family. Derrick knew the time had come for the moment he had been dreading. On the evening of the dinner, he arrived at Lily's parents' home dressed in his best suit, his palms slick with sweat despite the cool evening air. He kept his thoughts focused on Lily, how her smile lit up the room, and how her hand in his had always felt like home. But deep down he could feel the tension crawling up his spine. Lily's father, Charles Thompson, greeted him with a firm handshake and a brief smile, but there was something in his eyes, something cold. He didn't shake Derrick's hand like a man welcoming another into the family. He shook it like he was meeting someone who might disrupt everything he held dear. Susan, Lily's mother, was as poised as always, her sharp gaze not quite as warm as it had been in the past. Derrick had always respected her intelligence, but that respect was overshadowed by her apparent discomfort whenever he was around. She offered him a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Dinner will be ready soon," Susan said, her tone polite but distant, as if she were making an effort to stay civil. "Why don't you two sit down?" Lily grabbed Derrick's hand, squeezing it reassuringly as they made their way to the living room. She looked at him with the kind of warmth that made his heart ache, but Derrick could see the nervousness in her eyes, too. She was feeling the weight of the situation more than she let on. A few minutes later, Charles called them to the dining room. The table was set perfectly, the silverware gleaming under the soft light of the chandelier. But the air in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Derrick could feel his heart beating faster, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure what to expect. The conversation at the dinner table started normally enough, polite chatter about their days, nothing too personal. But Derrick could sense the shift when Lily cleared her throat and looked at him, signaling that it was time to tell her parents about the engagement. "Mom, Dad," Lily began, her voice soft but clear. "There's something Derrick and I need to share with you." Derrick's breath caught in his throat, and he gripped his glass of water tightly. Lily's hand rested gently on his. This was the moment. It was all about to change. "We're getting married," Lily said, her voice full of hope. "Derrick proposed to me today." There was a long, frozen pause. Susan's smile faltered, and Charles's face hardened instantly. The air around them seemed to thicken, the warmth of the room suddenly feeling suffocating. Derrick's heart began to race as he looked at Lily's parents. He had braced himself for this moment, but he wasn't prepared for the silence that followed. Charles set his fork down with an audible clink, his eyes narrowing as he turned to Lily. "You're what?" "We're getting married," Lily repeated, her voice firmer now, though Derrick could hear the anxiety hiding behind her words. There was a moment of quiet, and then Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor as he walked away from the table. Susan followed him, her face unreadable. Lily stood up, her eyes filled with panic. "Dad, Mom, what's wrong? We're happy. Why can't you just be happy for us?" Charles turned to face her, his tone low and controlled but unmistakably stern. "Lily, you can't be serious. This is not right. You're talking about marrying him?" He gestured toward Derrick with a dismissive hand. "This isn't some small thing, Lily. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Derrick felt the sting of the words, but he didn't say anything. He wanted to stand up for himself, to tell Charles exactly how hurtful his words were, but something held him back. He was in this moment not only for himself, but for Lily, and he wasn't going to let her down. Susan stepped forward, her voice calm but laced with disbelief. "Lily, this isn't about you or Derrick. It's about the reality of the world we live in. People will judge you, they'll talk, and you will have to live with that." She looked at Derrick, her gaze cold and direct. "This isn't a world where you can just ignore those things, and frankly, I'm concerned about what this means for your future." Lily's face twisted with frustration, and Derrick could see the anger building in her. But her voice remained steady. "Mom, Dad, I love Derrick. And I don't care about what other people think. I'm marrying him." "Lily," Charles said, his voice strained but insistent. "You don't understand. This is not just about you two. There are consequences. I'm not going to stand by and let you make a mistake like this." The tension in the room was suffocating, and Derrick felt the weight of it pressing against him, suffocating him with every word that came out of Charles's mouth. But Lily stood firm. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you that Derrick and I are getting married. We don't need your permission." There was a long silence as the two of them locked eyes, neither willing to back down. Derrick could feel the heaviness of the moment, of everything hanging in the balance. Susan's voice was low but cutting as she spoke. "You'll regret this, Lily. You'll see." And with those words, the distance between them seemed to grow even wider. The love that Derrick and Lily shared felt fragile, like something that could be torn apart by the harsh winds of judgment and bigotry. Lily turned to Derrick, her eyes brimming with tears. He could feel her fear, but he also saw her determination. "I'm not backing down," she whispered to him, her voice barely audible but filled with unwavering strength. "I'll fight for us." Derrick pulled her into a hug, both of them standing there in the midst of her parents' disbelief, knowing that the path ahead would be anything but easy. The storm had only just begun, and they were about to face it together. 3 days blurred into weeks, but the silence from Lily's parents remained deafening. No phone calls, no messages, not even a curt reply to the engagement announcement email they'd sent out. It was as if Lily had suddenly vanished from their world, erased for daring to love someone they couldn't accept. Derrick tried not to let it consume him, but some nights he lay awake beside Lily, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd stolen something from her, something sacred. Her family, her history, her peace. He wasn't used to this kind of quiet war. In his youth, conflict was loud, direct, unmistakable. He had survived taunts in high school, teachers who looked through him, employers who asked more questions than they should. But this was different. It was a rejection cloaked in silence. And somehow it hurt more. Lily tried to brush it off, at least at first. "They'll come around," she'd say, painting on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "They're just shocked. They need time." But time ticked on, and with each passing week, her voice became more brittle, more unsure. She stopped talking about her parents altogether. She kept busy, planning the wedding, working overtime, filling the silence with motion. But Derrick saw through it. The way she lingered a moment too long on the couch after dinner, phone in hand, checking it, then locking the screen without saying a word. He hated seeing her like that, caught between the love they were building and the family that raised her. And he hated that, no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't change their minds, couldn't prove he was worthy. Was it about his past, his neighborhood, his job, or was it just his skin? Did none of his achievements matter once they looked at him and saw what he looked like? The question haunted him. One Friday evening, everything boiled over. They were having dinner in their apartment. Derrick had cooked, trying to surprise her with one of her favorites, creamy mushroom risotto and grilled shrimp. The candles flickered between them, but Lily barely touched her food. "You okay?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then her fork clattered onto her plate. "They're not coming, Derrick." He blinked. "What?" "For the wedding," she said, voice flat. "I called them again today. I told them the venue's booked, the date's set, and that I wanted them there, that I needed them there." Derrick watched her. She wouldn't meet his gaze. "And?" he asked. She looked up. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell, just a hard, bitter stare. "They said if I go through with this, they won't be part of it, or of anything else after." Silence. Derrick's stomach twisted. He set his fork down carefully, trying to breathe past the lump forming in his throat. "I'm sorry, Lily." "No," she said sharply, almost snapping. "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. But they're your family. And you're my family now." The silence stretched between them, heavy and humming. Derrick reached for her hand. She let him take it, but her fingers trembled. "I didn't think they'd actually—" She trailed off. Then suddenly, the floodgates opened. "God, I feel so stupid. I thought they were better than this. I really did. All my life I believed they loved me unconditionally. But now I see the conditions were just invisible until you came along." Derrick closed his eyes. "They'll come around," he said, though he didn't believe it anymore. Not really. Lily shook her head. "Even if they do, it'll never be the same. Something's broken. I don't know if it can be fixed." That night, they didn't talk much more. Lily curled up next to him in bed, her back to his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, wishing he could take her pain and bury it somewhere deep, where it couldn't reach her. But it wasn't just her pain anymore. The fallout began to ripple outward. At work, Derrick started getting odd stares. A colleague mentioned seeing a post on some local Facebook group, thinly veiled racism dressed up as concern over certain people entering respectable families. Lily, too, found herself on the receiving end of subtle shifts. Friends who once supported her grew distant. A bridesmaid dropped out without explanation. Her boss suddenly questioned whether she was distracted lately and if she was still focused on long-term goals. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every glance, every whispered comment, every awkward silence at lunch. Little things, but they piled up. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal meeting at work where a client had mistaken him for the delivery guy, Derrick found himself pacing the small balcony outside their apartment. His hands trembled with rage, shame, and helplessness. When Lily came home and found him there, she didn't ask questions. She just stood with him, both staring out at the skyline, the city glowing in 1,000 directions that suddenly felt further away than ever. "I didn't think love would be this hard," he whispered. "It's not love that's hard," she replied. "It's the hate around it." Their wedding was still 3 months away, and every day felt like a battle. But somehow, in all the chaos, Derrick began to understand something he hadn't seen before. This wasn't just about love. It wasn't just about race, either. It was about power, about control, about who got to decide what was acceptable, who got to belong. And Derrick? He wasn't going to let anyone decide that for him. Not anymore. He didn't know if her parents would ever come around. He didn't know if the world would ever be ready to see their love for what it truly was. But he knew this. He wasn't going anywhere. Neither was she. And that had to be enough. 4. The wedding day arrived quietly, as if it too had come to terms with the weight of what had led up to it. Derrick stood at the altar, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, his palms slightly sweating as he waited for Lily. He hadn't seen her yet, but he could feel her presence even from a distance. She was out there, preparing for the moment when she would walk down the aisle to him, the love of his life, the woman who had fought for him when it would have been easier to walk away. The guests were gathered, but the absence of Lily's parents was palpable. It wasn't just the empty chair at the front. It was the tension in the air, the unspoken truth. But despite the hole they left, Derrick didn't feel defeated. If anything, he felt stronger than he ever had before. His heart had been broken by their rejection, but it had also been mended by the fierce determination of the woman standing beside him in the face of that rejection. Lily, too, had felt the sting of their absence, but she didn't show it. She smiled as she walked toward him, a smile that was filled with strength and love. The dress she wore was simple, elegant, and stunning, just like her. Her eyes shone with something deeper than sadness, something that could only be called resilience. Every step she took was a step closer to a future that was entirely theirs. She wasn't going to let anything or anyone stop her. Derrick's heart swelled as she reached him, her hand slipping into his, and for a moment, the entire world disappeared. It was just the two of them, standing on the threshold of something beautiful and powerful. "I never thought it would be like this," Lily whispered to him, her voice cracking as she looked up at him, her eyes full of unshed tears. "But here we are." Derrick smiled softly, leaning in to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We're here because we're stronger than anything that tried to tear us apart." The ceremony went by in a blur. Vows spoken, rings exchanged, promises made, but it wasn't the vows or the rings that mattered most in that moment. It was the promise they had already made to each other long before they stood there. The promise to fight for their love, to build a life together, to refuse to let anyone dictate what their love was worth. As they exchanged their final I do's, they walked down the aisle together, their hands clasped tightly. The applause from the crowd was warm, the cheers genuine. But Derrick couldn't help but feel that the real victory wasn't in the ceremony itself. It was in the love they shared, the love that had withstood the tests of time, distance, and prejudice, the love that had transcended what others expected of them. In the days that followed, there was no grand reconciliation with Lily's parents. Their absence at the wedding left a permanent scar, one that would never fully heal. But as Derrick and Lily settled into their life together, it became clear that their love was no longer dependent on the approval of anyone else. They had each other, and that was enough. They moved into a small house on the edge of the city, a quiet place to begin their new life. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. They had everything they needed in each other. Over time, they started to build their family, first a dog, then later a small group of close friends who had become their new family, people who saw them for who they truly were, people who saw their love. Every so often, Derrick would hear a whisper of what Lily's parents thought of their marriage. Someone would mention them in passing, offering their regrets for not attending the wedding or for not supporting them. But that didn't matter to Derrick. It wasn't about them anymore. He had done what he needed to do. He had loved Lily with everything in him, and in the end, that had been enough. One evening, months later, Derrick sat on their porch as the sun set over the city. Lily was inside, humming to herself as she made dinner, and the house was filled with warmth and love. As Derrick sat there, he couldn't help but think back to that first day they had met, to the fears he had felt, to the doubts he had carried. He had never imagined his life would turn out like this. He had never imagined that he would find someone who would stand beside him, no matter the cost. But here they were. Lily came outside, holding 2 glasses of wine, and handed one to Derrick. She sat down beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The world was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, Derrick felt that everything was exactly as it should be. "I never imagined this would be our life," Lily murmured, staring out at the horizon. "But I wouldn't change a thing." Derrick kissed the top of her head. "Neither would I." They sat there for a while, letting the silence speak volumes. They had faced so much, fought so hard, but now, in this moment, they understood what it truly meant to be free. Free from judgment, free from the chains of other people's expectations. They had broken through the barriers that had been placed in their way, not just by Lily's parents, but by society as a whole. They had created a life that was theirs and theirs alone. As the night fell, the stars began to twinkle above them, the world slowly settling into the rhythm of the evening. And in that stillness, Derrick and Lily both knew that they had crossed a line, one that had once seemed impossible to cross. But love, when it was real, could break through anything. They had done it, together, and nothing could ever take that away.